Charlotte Whitmore lifted her chin, stepped out of the bride line, and told the richest man in Montana to his face that he ought to choose somebody else. "I ain't what you came for, sir. Nobody's ever wanted the fat girl, and I don't reckon you'll be the first." The whole town of Silver Creek went dead quiet. 10 women stood prettier, younger, thinner. But William Carter walked past every last one of them and stopped in front of her. And what that lonely cowboy said next silenced a whole town for 20 years. If stories like this one warm your heart, take a moment right now and subscribe to the channel. Then stay with me all the way to the end because this one earns it. And do me a kindness, tell me in the comments what town you're watching from, so I can see just how far Charlotte's story has traveled. The summer of 1884 lay over Silver Creek like a wet wool blanket, and by 10 o'clock in the morning, the whole of Montana Territory seemed ready to catch fire. Charlotte Whitmore had been standing in that line for the better part of an hour, and not one of the 9 women beside her had said a single word to her. That was fine. She was used to it. "Stand up straight, all of you," the matchmaker called out. Her name was Mrs. Pennywell, and she'd shepherded these 10 girls all the way from a boarding house in St. Louis. "Mr. Carter will be here directly, and I won't have him thinking I brought him a batch of slouching farm hands." The girl to Charlotte's left, a slim thing with yellow curls named Priscilla, gave a soft laugh behind her gloved hand. "You'd best worry about yourself, Mrs. Pennywell," Priscilla said sweetly. "The rest of us don't have anything to be ashamed of." She didn't look at Charlotte when she said it. She didn't have to. Charlotte kept her eyes forward. She'd learned a long time ago that the trick to surviving a room full of people who despised her was to make herself very still, and to keep her breathing even, and to never not once let them see it land. "I heard he's got 1,000 head of cattle," whispered another girl farther down the line. "I heard 2,000. I heard he's handsome as sin and hasn't touched a woman since his wife died." "How'd she die?" "Fever, years back. They say he buried her himself up on the hill behind the house and hasn't so much as smiled since." "Then it's plain what he needs," Priscilla said, smoothing her skirts. "A young wife to make him forget. Somebody pretty enough to give a grievin' man a reason to climb out of bed of a mornin'." "You reckon you're that somebody?" another girl asked, half teasing, half jealous. "I reckon I've got a better claim than most standin' in this yard." Priscilla's eyes cut sideways just once toward Charlotte, and then away, as though glancing too long might be something a body could catch. "Some of us more 'n others." A ripple of laughter went down the line, soft, cruel. The kind of laughter Charlotte had heard in every schoolyard and every kitchen and every church social she'd ever stood at the edge of. "You'd best hush," murmured the girl nearest her, a mousy thing with freckles, who had at least the decency to look ashamed of herself. "Mrs. Pennywell'll hear." "Let her hear. She's the one let it into the wagon." Charlotte listened to all of it and said nothing. She wasn't here for 1,000 head of cattle. She wasn't here for a handsome man who hadn't smiled in years. She was here because a woman like her didn't get to be picky about how she got out of St. Louis, and this had been the only door that opened. "Ladies," Mrs. Pennywell hissed. "He's coming." Charlotte heard the horse before she saw the man. A slow, heavy walk, iron shoes on hard-packed dirt, no hurry in it at all. The kind of walk a man used when he owned the ground he was crossing and knew nobody was going to take it from him. Then the line went quiet, and William Carter rode into the yard. He was tall in the saddle, broad through the shoulders, dust on the brim of his hat, and more of it worked into the creases of his brown leather vest. His face was weathered, but not old dark stubble along a hard jaw, and his eyes Charlotte noticed. His eyes, even from 30 feet off, were the tired kind. The kind a person got from carrying something heavy for a very long time and never setting it down. He swung down off the horse without a word. He didn't look at the line right away. He looped the reins over the hitching post, slow and careful, like the horse deserved his attention more than the 10 women did. "Mr. Carter," Mrs. Pennywell said, hurrying forward with her hand out. "What an honor. I trust you received my letters. I've brought you the very finest young women St. Louis had to offer, every one of them of good character and sound." "Ma'am?" He touched the brim of his hat to her, and that one small word cut hers clean off. "Appreciate you comin' all this way." He turned toward the line. 9 of the 10 women straightened at once. 9 chins lifted. 9 smiles bloomed like it had been rehearsed, and maybe it had. Priscilla shifted her weight so the sun caught her curls just right. Charlotte didn't move. She looked down at her own hands folded over the worn cover of her mother's Bible, and she thought, let him pick one of them quick, so I can go find whatever comes next. William Carter started down the line. He stopped in front of Priscilla first. She smiled up at him with everything she had. "Good mornin', sir," she said. "I'm Priscilla Vance of the Charleston Vances. I can sew and sing and keep a fine table." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded polite and moved on. Priscilla's smile cracked at the corner. He stopped in front of the next girl, and the next, a word here, a nod there. He touched his hat to each of them, courteous as a Sunday preacher, and he moved on down the line, and Charlotte watched the smiles curdle one by one as it dawned on each of them that being looked at wasn't the same as being chosen. "He's taken his time," someone whispered. "He's savin' the best for last," Priscilla whispered back, though her voice had lost some of its sugar. Charlotte's stomach knotted because she was at the end of the line. She was always at the end of the line. And she knew the way she'd always known exactly how this went. He would reach her, and his eyes would drop to her body the way every set of eyes always did, and something in his face would go polite and cold, and he would move on to make his choice among the pretty ones behind her. She braced for it. She had a lifetime of practice bracing for it. William Carter reached the end of the line, and he stopped in front of Charlotte Whitmore. She waited for his eyes to drop. They didn't. He looked at her face, just her face, long enough that the silence around them started to feel like a held breath. "Ma'am," he said quietly. Charlotte lifted her chin. If he was going to say something cruel, she'd rather he said it to her eyes. "Sir." "You've got a name." "Charlotte." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Charlotte Whitmore." "Charlotte." He said it slow, like he was setting it somewhere safe. "You come all the way from St. Louis, same as the rest." "I did." "What for?" The question surprised her. Nobody ever asked her what for. She opened her mouth to give the easy answer, the polite answer, and instead the true one came out. "Because there wasn't anything left for me back there, sir. And I figured a hard life somewhere new beat a hopeless one somewhere old." Something moved behind his tired eyes. He was quiet a moment. Down the line, Priscilla let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Sir, you can't be serious. You've hardly looked at the rest of us." William Carter didn't turn his head. He kept his eyes on Charlotte. "I've looked plenty, miss," he said. "I've been looked at plenty too in my time. Reckon I know the difference between a person looking at you and a person looking at your money." Charlotte's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Mr. Carter." Mrs. Pennywell said, her voice climbing. "Perhaps you'd like a moment to reconsider. There are, that is, some of the other young ladies are more suited to the physical demands of ranch life and—" "Ma'am." Again that touch of the hat again, the quiet word that closed a door. "You askin' me if I can see?" "I know of course not, I only. Because I can see just fine." He said it plain, not loud, not angry. Just plain the way a man states a fact that isn't up for argument. "I can see there's 10 women standin' in my yard, and 9 of 'em looked at me like I was a bank they'd like to rob, and one of 'em told me she came here 'cause she'd rather work hard for something than starve easy for nothing." He nodded once toward Charlotte. "That last one's the only honest thing that's happened to me all morning." Charlotte's breath caught. "Sir?" she said, and to her horror, her voice wobbled. She steadied it. "I think you ought to know what you're choosing. I've never been what men come looking for. I've been passed over more times than I can count. If you pick me to be kind or to prove some point to these people, I'd rather you didn't. I've had my fill of being somebody's charity." The whole yard had gone silent. Even the horses seemed to hold still. William Carter looked at her for a long, long moment. "Charity," he said, and there was something almost like a smile at the very edge of it, though it didn't quite make it all the way. Ma'am, I own the biggest ranch in this territory. I've got more money than I know what to do with, and a house so quiet I can hear the clock ticking 2 rooms away. You reckon a man in my position hands out charity? I ain't looking to save anybody." He paused. "I'm looking for somebody who'd sit across a supper table and be real, and I found her at the end of a line where the rest of this town would have walked right on by." He straightened up and turned at last to face the whole gathered crowd, because a crowd had gathered. Of course it had. Half of Silver Creek had come to see which lucky girl the rich cowboy would pick. "I'll take Miss Whitmore," he said. "That's my choice. It ain't gonna change." For one heartbeat, nobody made a sound. Then the town found its tongue. "He can't be right in the head," someone muttered. "Passed over the Vance girl for that. Fever must have cooked his brain along with his poor wife." Charlotte heard every word. She always heard every word. And she felt the old familiar heat crawl up her neck, the shame that never belonged to her, but that she carried anyway, because the world had spent 25 years telling her it was hers to carry. But William Carter heard it too. He turned his head slow toward the loudest of them, a heavy-set man in a good coat, standing near the front with a gold watch chain across his belly and a smirk he hadn't bothered to hide. "You got something to say, Mayor Dunn?" William asked. "Say it to me then, not to the lady." The mayor's smirk faltered. "Now, William, I only meant a man of your standing. Why, you could have your pick of—" "I did have my pick," William said. "You watched me take it. But surely you'd want a wife the town could be, that reflects well on." "On what?" And now for the first time there was iron in the cowboy's voice. Not loud. Iron didn't need to be loud. "On you, Mayor. You want a pretty wife on my arm so the town looks a certain way when folks ride through. That the wife you're after, 'cause it sounds to me like you'd like me to marry your reputation." He shook his head. "I already buried one wife. I don't care to spend the rest of my life married to your opinion." "You've been alone too long, William," the mayor said, softer now, wheedling, changing his coat. "It's twisted your judgment. Grief does that to a man. Nobody blames you for it, but that's why a man in your state oughtn't be trusted to choose for himself. Let those of us with clearer heads—" "My judgment." William repeated the words, slow, tasting them. "My judgment picked out the one honest soul in a yard full of folks trying to sell me something. My judgment stood me up in front of you and said no. If that's a grievin' man's twisted judgment, Mayor, I'd hate to see what you call the sound kind. Reckon it looks a lot like a man doing what he's told." Somewhere in the crowd a man laughed under his breath and tried to swallow it. "You'll regret this," Dunn said, and the wheedling was gone now, and what was left underneath it wasn't pretty. "Mark me, when the shine wears off, and you're sitting across the table from that, and the whole territory's laughing behind your back, you'll wish you'd listened to old Amos Dunn." "Maybe." William settled his hat back low. "But I'll be laughing with my wife, and you'll be laughing alone with all your fine opinions. I know which supper table I'd rather sit at." A few people laughed at that uneasy, surprised laughs, the kind that slip out before folks decide whose side they're on. Mayor Dunn's face went red as a brick. Charlotte, standing at the end of the line with her mother's Bible pressed to her chest, felt something she had not felt in a very long time. It took her a moment to even name it. It had been gone so long. It was the feeling of somebody standing in front of her, between her and the crowd, on purpose. "Sir?" she said quietly, so only he could hear. "You don't have to do this." He glanced back at her. "Do what? Fight them. For me. It'll wear you down. It always wears people down in the end." She swallowed. "That's usually when they start to see me the way everyone else does." William Carter looked at her, and this time the smile made it all the way to his eyes, tired as they were. "Ma'am," he said, "I've been fighting this town my whole life over one thing or another. Cattle prices, water rights, whether a man's allowed to grieve his wife more'n a year without folks calling him strange." He shrugged one broad shoulder. "You'd be the first thing I ever fought him over that was worth the trouble." Charlotte didn't have an answer for that. In 25 years, nobody had ever left her without an answer by being kind. Mrs. Pennywell was fussing with her papers, clearly trying to salvage something. Well then, If Mr. Carter is quite certain the arrangement does call for a proper ceremony, of course, and I'll need signatures and—" "We'll do it right," William said. "Preacher Hollis still keeping the church up the road." "Yes, Mr. Carter, but then we'll go see him. Today, if the lady's willin'." He turned back to Charlotte, and here for the first time a flicker of uncertainty crossed his weathered face, like it had just occurred to him that he'd been deciding a great many things without asking the one person they were about. "If you're willin', Miss Whitmore, I've been talking at you like your say don't count. It counts. You can turn around and get back in that wagon, and I'll pay your way anywhere you'd care to go. No hard feelin's, and this town can go on wonderin' about me till the day I die." He paused. "But I'd rather you stayed." The other 9 women were staring at her now. Priscilla with open contempt. The others with something closer to bewilderment, as though the natural order of the world had tipped sideways and spilled all of them out of the places they'd been so sure they'd occupy. Charlotte thought about St. Louis, about the boarding house and the families she'd worked for who'd let her go the moment a slimmer, prettier girl came asking after the position. She thought about her mother dead 2 years now who'd held her hand at the end and said, "Charlie, don't you ever let 'em make you small. You're not too much. There's just too many small-hearted people who can't hold all of you." She thought about being seen, about a stranger in a leather vest who'd looked at her face, and only her face, and asked her name, and asked her what for, and stood between her and a jeering town like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'll stay," she heard herself say, and she watched something ease in William Carter's shoulders, some old tension going slack, like a man who'd braced for a no his whole life and gotten a yes. "All right then," he said softly. "All right." He offered her his arm. Charlotte looked at it, a crooked elbow held out for her to take, the way a gentleman offered his arm to a lady in the picture books she used to read as a girl, and had long since stopped believing had anything to do with her. She was aware of the whole town watching. She was aware of Priscilla's stare, and the mayor's red face, and Mrs. Pennywell's flustered clucking, and all the whispers waiting to be whispered the second the 2 of them were out of earshot. She took his arm. "Now hold on." Mayor Dunn had recovered himself and stepped forward, planting his considerable self square in their path. "William, I'll speak plainly as an old friend of your father's. This is a mistake. This town has watched you grieve for years, and we've been patient, and now you mean to shame us all by parading by marrying." He gestured at Charlotte, without quite looking at her, the way a man gestures at a piece of furniture in the wrong room. "By marrying her, what'll people say when they ride through and see the great William Carter took the leftover?" Charlotte felt William's arm go rigid beneath her hand, but before he could speak, she did. "Mayor Dunn, is it?" Her voice came out clear, clearer than she'd expected. 25 years of swallowing it had left her apparently with a great deal of it stored up. The mayor blinked as though the furniture had spoken. Yes. You've called me a leftover twice now." She held his eyes. "And a mistake once, and you did it standing 3 feet from me, like I was too simple to understand English or too far beneath you to be owed the courtesy of hearing it from further off." She tilted her head. "I've been called worse, sir, by better men than you, but I've noticed something standing here this last little while. And what," the mayor said stiffly, "is that you're a great deal more worried about what folks'll say than Mr. Carter is." Charlotte let that sit a moment. A man who's certain of himself doesn't spend his mornings fretting over strangers riding through. Only a man who isn't sure of much does that. So I'll wager it's not really me you're afraid of, it's them. She nodded at the crowd. "And what they'd think of you if you didn't put me in my place. Well." She patted William's arm gently and looked up at the cowboy beside her. "I don't reckon I'm the one who needs putting anywhere. I've got somewhere to be." The crowd had gone very, very quiet, and then from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. Just one pair of hands. Slow. An old woman in a gray shawl, her face creased with years clapping, like she'd waited a long time to see somebody say a true thing to Mayor Dunn's face. The mayor's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. He stepped aside. William Carter looked down at Charlotte, and there was something new in his face now. Not just kindness and not just relief. Something closer to wonder. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I believe you might be the most dangerous thing to happen to this town in 20 years. Only to the parts of it that had it comin'," Charlotte said. And for the first time, in longer than either of them could rightly remember, William Carter laughed. A real one, cracked and rusty from disuse, like a gate that hadn't swung in years, finally giving way. He led her toward the little white church up the road, and the town parted to let them pass, and the whispers followed. Of course the whispers followed, they always did. But Charlotte found walking on the arm of a man who'd chosen her in front of everyone, that for the first time in her life, the whispers seemed to be walking behind her instead of ahead. The church was small and plain, and smelled of old wood and beeswax candles. Preacher Hollis was a thin, kindly man, who'd been told nothing of the morning's events, and blinked in confusion when William Carter walked in with a woman on his arm, and said without ceremony, "Reverend, we'd like to be married. Married, today." The preacher looked from William to Charlotte and back. This is very sudden, William, and with the arrangement being what it is, mail order and all, I'd not want to rush a thing so sacred. Perhaps a few weeks to be certain. Reverend Hollis." William took his hat off entirely now and held it against his chest, and there was a plainness to him, a bare honesty that made Charlotte's throat tighten. "I've been certain of exactly 2 things in my life. First was that I loved my Sarah, God rest her, and I'd have followed her into the ground if the ranch hadn't needed tendon. Second is this." He looked at Charlotte. "I don't need weeks. I need a witness and a Bible and a man of God. I'd be obliged if you'd be all 3. Charlotte's eyes stung. She looked down at her mother's Bible still clutched in her hands. "Reverend," she said quietly, "I've got the Bible at least." Preacher Hollis looked at the worn book in her hands, and then at her face, and something in his own softened. "Well," he said, "I suppose the Lord's less interested in the calendar than folks give him credit for." He gestured them toward the front. "Come along then, come along." They were married in an empty church with the old woman in the gray shawl for a witness. She'd followed them up the road, it turned out, and slipped into a back pew. And when the preacher asked if anyone would stand up for the bride, she rose up on creaking knees and said, "I will. Somebody ought to, and I like the look of her." Her name was Widow Hartley, and she would matter later, though Charlotte didn't know that yet. Charlotte spoke her vows in a voice that only shook a little. William spoke his in that same low, certain way. He'd said everything all morning like a man laying stones in a foundation he meant to build a life on. And when Preacher Hollis said the words that made it done, William Carter did not kiss his new wife. Not there, not in front of the witness, not so soon. He simply took Charlotte's hand in both of his, her small, soft hand, swallowed up in his big, rough ones. And he held it, and he looked at her, and he said, "I meant it. Every word. You didn't get chosen 'cause nobody else would have you. You got chosen 'cause I've been looking a long time and it was you." He pressed her hand. "Don't you go believin' otherwise no matter what this town tells you. And it'll try to tell you. Folks like Dunn, they can't abide a person findin' happiness they didn't hand out themselves." Charlotte looked in their joined hands. At the plain gold band he'd produced from his vest pocket, his mother's, he'd said quietly, and it fit her finger like it had been waiting. "Mr. Carter," she began. "William," he said. "You're my wife now. Reckon you've earned my Christian name. William." She tried it out and found she liked the weight of it. "I don't know how to do this. Be a wife. Be anybody's, let alone yours. I've spent so long making myself small and quiet so folks wouldn't notice me and find new ways to be cruel about it. I don't know how to be looked at. Not the way you looked at me back there." William Carter nodded slowly, like this was a serious thing she'd said and deserved a serious answer. "Then we'll learn it together," he said. "I don't rightly know how to be looked at anymore either. Not since Sarah. I've spent 5 years being the sad rich man folks felt sorry for, Or the sad rich man folks wanted something from, and I got so I couldn't tell one kind of stare from another. Maybe that's why I saw you clear." He gave a small, crooked smile. Two people who forgot how to be seen. Reckon we're a matched set. Outside the little church, Silver Creek buzzed like a kicked hive. Word was already spreading from the mercantile to the saloon to the far edges of every ranch in the valley. William Carter had passed over 9 beautiful women, and married the fat girl at the end of the line, and stood down Mayor Dunn to do it. And nobody could say why. They'd find out why in the end. The whole town would. But that would take time and heartbreak, and a reckoning none of them saw coming. For now there was only a small white church and an old woman in a gray shawl wiping her eyes in the back pew, and a preacher closing his good Bible, and a cowboy helping his new wife up into his wagon with a hand at her elbow like she was made of something precious. "Where are we going?" Charlotte asked as he took up the reins. "Home," William said. They rode a while in silence, the town falling away behind them, the country opening up ahead. Charlotte sat with her hands folded over the Bible and the new ring warm on her finger, and tried to make sense of a morning that had turned her whole life over like a wagon in a ditch. "Can I ask you something?" she said at last. "You're my wife. You can ask me anything you please." "Why me?" She heard the smallness in her own voice and hated it, but she asked it anyway because she had to know, because a lifetime of hard experience had taught her that there was always a catch, always a reason, always some cruel joke waiting at the bottom of any kindness pointed her way. "And don't tell me it's 'cause I was honest. There's honest women all over this territory. You could have had your pick and everyone knew it, so why me standing at the end of a line, the one nobody wanted?" William was quiet a long moment. The horse's hooves kept their slow, even time. "When Sarah got sick," he said finally, "the whole town came around. Casseroles, kind words, ladies sitting with her so I could tend the stock. And I was grateful, I truly was." He kept his eyes on the road. "But I noticed something those last weeks. They looked at her different once she got thin and gray and couldn't hardly lift her head off the pillow. They still called her pretty, but they didn't mean her. They meant the memory of her, the picture on the mantel. They loved the version of my wife that was easy to love." His jaw worked, and she knew it. She said to me once near the end, "Will, they don't see me anymore. They see a sick woman they'll miss. But you—" She squeezed his hand. He said, weak as a kitten, "You still see me." Charlotte's eyes filled. "So that's what I went looking for," William went on. "Not a face. Faces change. Sickness takes 'em years, take 'em grief takes 'em. I went looking for whatever it was Sarah had that made a man want to keep seeing her even when she wasn't pretty anymore." He turned and looked at Charlotte, then full on. "And I found it standing at the end of a line telling me not to pick her out of pity. A woman who'd been given every reason in the world to beg and didn't. Who told the richest man in Montana to choose somebody else because she'd sooner be alone than be somebody's charity?" He faced the road again. "That's not a thing you can see with your eyes, Charlotte. That's a thing you feel. And I felt it clear as a church bell the second you opened your mouth." Charlotte didn't trust her voice. She looked out at the green and gold country rolling past and let a single tear track down her cheek, and she didn't bother to hide it because there was nobody left to hide it from. "My mother used to say something like that," she managed. "She said the world would only ever measure me one way, and I'd have to learn to measure myself another, or I'd shrink down to nothing, trying to be small enough to please folks who'd never be pleased." She wiped her cheek. "I always thought it was just something a mother says to a homely daughter, something to make the hurt smaller." "Weren't homely," William said. "You didn't know me at 10 years old when the other children. Don't need to. Knew you at 10 o'clock this morning and there wasn't a homely thing about you." He said it flat like a fact about the weather. "You want to talk about homely, we can talk about Amos Dunn's soul. Now there's an ugly thing. But you—" He shook his head once. "No, ma'am. And despite everything, despite the whispers and the mayor and 25 years of learning to expect the worst," Charlotte laughed. It surprised her coming out of her like that, bright and unguarded, a sound she hardly recognized as her own. William glanced over at the sound of it, and something in his tired face lifted like a man who'd found a spring in dry country. "There," he said quietly. "That's a fine thing. Don't believe I've heard it before." "Heard what?" "You laugh." He faced forward again, but the corner of his mouth stayed turned up. "Reckon I'd like to arrange to hear it more." "Home," William said, and Charlotte Whitmore Carter, who had never in her 25 years had a home that anyone couldn't take away from her on a whim, turned that one word over in her heart, the whole long ride out of town, past the staring faces and the whispering porches, out to where the road opened up and the country rolled green and gold to the mountains. And there was nobody left to watch and no one left to judge, and only the two of them and the slow, steady horse and the enormous quiet of a life neither of them had ever imagined they'd be allowed to have. "Home," she said softly to nobody but herself. And she found, to her great surprise, that she believed it. The Carter ranch came up on them slow, and when Charlotte first saw the house, she went quiet because it was bigger than any home she'd ever set foot in, and something in her chest tightened at the thought of a woman like her walking through its front door like she belonged. "It's too much," she said before she could stop herself. "What is—" "The house, the land, all of it." She shook her head. "I know how to scrub floors, William. I don't know how to be mistress of something like this. Folks like me don't end up in houses like that. We end up cleaning them." William reined the horse in and looked at her. "You keep saying folks like you," he said, "like there's a whole herd of you branded and sorted somewhere. There ain't. There's just you. And you can end up wherever you've got the sand to stand." Before she could answer, a man came around the side of the barn, big through the chest gray and the mustache. A rope coiled over one shoulder and stopped dead when he saw who was sitting up beside his boss. "Boone," William said. "This is my wife, Mrs. Carter, Charlotte." Boone didn't say a word for a full 3 seconds. Charlotte felt every one of them. Then the old cowhand took his hat clean off, held it against his chest, and dipped his head. "Ma'am, welcome home." 2 words. Welcome home. And Charlotte, who had braced for a sneer, had to look away fast toward the mountains so the man wouldn't see what those 2 words did to her. But there was another hand standing back by the corral who did not take his hat off. Younger, lean, a slick, watchful look about him. He leaned on the fence rail and let his eyes go up and down Charlotte once slow, and then he spat in the dirt and turned back to his work. "Who's that one?" Charlotte asked quietly as William helped her down. "Colton. Hired him on last spring." William's voice had cooled a degree. "Good hand with horses. We'll leave it there." "You don't trust him." William gave her a sideways look. "Married you 3 hours, and you're already reading me." "I've spent my whole life reading people," Charlotte said. "It's how a body knows which room to leave before it turns ugly." She watched Colton's back. "That one's already turned. He just hasn't shown you yet." William didn't argue with her. That she'd learn was one of the ways he said he'd heard. She crossed the yard toward the corral herself before William could stop her, because a lifetime had taught her the worst thing you could do with a man like Colton was let him think you were afraid to walk up to him. "You'd be Colton," she said. He turned slow, chewing something, and looked at her the way a man looks at a horse he means to lowball. "Ma'am, you didn't take your hat off." "Didn't figure I had to." "You don't." Charlotte held his eyes. "I only wanted to know what kind of man I was dealing with, and now I do. A man tells you everything you need to know in the first thing he decides not to do." She smiled at him, pleasant as Sunday. "You have a good afternoon, Mr. Colton. I'll be seeing you at supper." "Don't eat with the house." "No," she agreed. "You don't. I noticed that too." And she turned and walked away, and left him standing there chewing on nothing, trying to work out whether he'd just been threatened by the fattest woman in the territory and hating that he couldn't be sure. Inside the house was clean, but wrong clean. The way a place is clean when nobody truly lives in it, when a man dusts because dusting is a chore, and not because a home deserves tending. There was a rifle over the door and a good table with one chair pulled out and 3 shoved in. And on the mantel, in a silver frame, a photograph of a fair-haired woman with a gentle face. Charlotte stopped in front of it. "Sarah," she said. It wasn't a question. "Sarah." William stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands. "You want me to take it down? It's all right. You wouldn't be the first wife to want a dead one off the wall." "Don't you dare!" Charlotte turned. "She was your wife. She kept this house. She loved you and you loved her. And she died, and none of that stops being true, because I'm standing here now." She looked back at the photograph. "I won't be a woman who makes a man ashamed of his grief. I've been made ashamed of enough things by enough people. I won't do it to you." William didn't say anything. When she glanced over, he had turned his face to the window and his jaw was working, and she understood she'd best let him have the moment alone. So instead, she rolled up her sleeves. "Where do you keep your flour?" she said. William turned back, and his eyes were wet, but his voice came out steady. "Ma'am, flour, lard, whatever passes for a larder in this sad, quiet house." She tied her apron. "You said it was so quiet you could hear the clock 2 rooms over." "Well, a house gets quiet like that when nobody's cooked in it in a while. I aim to fix that tonight, and I'll need to know where a woman finds a skillet in this territory." And that was the first night. Charlotte Whitmore Carter cooked in a kitchen that hadn't smelled of anything but dust in 5 years, and William sat at his own table in the chair that had been pulled out all that time, waiting, she realized, waiting for somebody to fill the ones beside it. And when she set the plate down in front of him, he looked at it a long moment before he ate. "Sarah used to hum," he said suddenly, "when she cooked, some hymn. Couldn't never carry it right, but she'd hum it anyhow." Charlotte sat down across from him. "You want me to hum?" "No." He picked up his fork. "I want you to be you. I've had enough of living with the ghost of what a house used to sound like." He took a bite and closed his eyes, and when he opened them, something in him had eased. "This is the first real supper this table's held in 5 years. I'd like you to know that. In case a day ever comes, you doubt you belong here." "I'll doubt it every day," Charlotte said quietly. "That's not a thing a person unlearns in a week, William. 25 years of being told you're too much doesn't wash out because one good man set a 4th chair at the table." She looked down at her plate. "So don't take it hard when I do. Just keep setting the chair. That's all a body like me needs. Somebody who keeps setting the chair even on the days I can't believe it's mine." William put down his fork. He looked at her a long moment across the lamplit table. "Every night," he said, "long as I've breath in me. I'll set that chair every night, and one of these years you'll sit down in it without flinching, and I'll get to be here to see it." He picked the fork back up. "That's a thing worth staying alive for, I reckon. More'n I've had in 5 years. Charlotte looked at him. Then she looked at the empty chairs. And for the first time she let herself imagine just for a moment filling them. The days that followed found their own rhythm, and it surprised her how quick that happened. She scrubbed the wrongness out of the house first. Not the memory of Sarah that stayed, but the deadness, the museum stillness of a place kept but not lived in. She put up curtains. She planted the kitchen garden that had gone to weeds. She learned the names of the hands and which ones took sugar in their coffee, and she fed them all of them at the long table on the porch. And one by one those hard-weathered men stopped calling her Mrs. Carter and started calling her Miss Charlie, which from a cowboy is close to love. All except Colton. It was Widow Hartley who first put a name to the thing Charlotte had been feeling. The old woman came out to the ranch on the 8th day driving her own little cart, and when Charlotte came out to meet her, she climbed down without waiting for help, and looked her up and down, and nodded once satisfied. "You've put curtains up," the widow said. "Good. A house without curtains is a house waiting on a coffin. This place has been waiting on one for 5 years. She let Charlotte take her arm up the porch steps. "Now sit me down and give me coffee, and tell me true, is he good to you?" "He is," Charlotte said. "Better than I know how to hold. Course he is. Carters were always the best of a bad lot in this valley." The old woman settled into a chair. Which is why I drove all the way out here on these ruined knees, girl, so hear me. You stood up to Amos Dunn in front of the whole town. You made him small in front of the people he needs to feel big in front of. And I know that man. Knew his mother God, rest the poor woman. Amos Dunn has never in 60 years forgiven a single soul who made him look a fool. He smiles, and he waits, and he comes at you sideways, months later from a direction you forgot to guard. She fixed Charlotte with a hard old eye. So don't you let this quiet fool you. It ain't peace. It's the top of a hill before the wagon rolls. Charlotte felt the truth of it settle in her stomach like a cold stone. Why are you telling me this? Because 40 years ago I was a big plain girl nobody wanted, and a good man saw me anyhow, and this town spent our whole marriage trying to make me sorry for it. The widow's voice cracked just slightly. I clapped for you in that yard, Charlotte Carter, because 40 years too late somebody finally got to do the thing I never had the sand to do. Don't you let them take it. You hear me? Whatever's coming and something's coming, don't you dare let them make you sorry. Charlotte reached over and took the old woman's papery hand. I won't, she said. I promise you I won't. She meant it. And she'd have cause to remember she'd promised it before the summer was through. You ever notice, she said to William one evening, that Colton never eats at the table? He keeps to himself. No. Charlotte set down the mending. A man who keeps to himself eats fast and leaves. Colton doesn't eat with us because he doesn't want to look me in the eye while he does it. That's a different thing. That's a man with something to hide. Charlie, how many head did you count in the north pasture last week? William stopped. What? You said 40. Boone said 40. Colton wrote 32 in the tally book. She held up the leather ledger she'd been keeping the household accounts in, and beside it, another worn with columns of figures in a cramped hand. I've been keeping your books, William, because somebody ought to, and the numbers don't add. They haven't added for a while. Somebody's been shaving cattle off your count a few at a time slow enough you'd never feel it. And the man holding the pencil is the one who won't eat at your table. William came and stood over the book. He was quiet a long time. You're certain, he said. I'm certain the numbers are wrong. I'm certain Colton wrote them. What I'm not certain of is whether he's stupid or whether he's got somebody buying the ones that go missing. She closed the book. And I'd put my last dollar. It's not stupid. Boone's watched that man for a year and never caught a thing. Boone counts cattle. I count columns. It's a different eye. Charlotte tapped the page. A thief who steals with his hands gets caught by a man who watches hands. A thief who steals with a pencil only gets caught by somebody who reads. Colton's been safe on this ranch a whole year for the same reason he thinks he's safe from me. He looked at the men around him and reckoned none of them could read a ledger better than he could lie in one. She looked up. He reckoned wrong the day you brought me home. That was the first crack. Charlotte felt it open under the whole quiet, careful peace they'd been building, and she knew the way she always knew that ugly was coming to their door. It came 4 days later, and it did not come from Colton. It came from town. A rider she didn't recognize came up the road at a lope kicking dust, and reined in hard by the porch where Charlotte was shelling peas. He didn't tip his hat. He didn't ask her name. This the Carter place? It is. Got a paper for Carter. Where is he? You can leave it with me. I'm his wife. The rider laughed a short, ugly sound and looked her over. You're the one then? The one Carter, huh? He shook his head. The whole town's right. He has gone soft in the head. Charlotte set down the bowl of peas very carefully. You've got a paper, she said. Give it here, or ride back and tell whoever sent you that Carter's wife wouldn't take it, and let's see how that suits him. Something in her voice made the man stop laughing. He tossed the folded paper down onto the porch boards at her feet, a small cruelty making her stoop, and wheeled his horse and rode off. Charlotte did not stoop. She waited until Boone came around the barn, and she said, Boone, would you be so kind? And the old man picked the paper up and handed it to her with both hands like it mattered that she not have to bend for it. And it did matter. They both knew it did. She read it, and her blood went cold. When William came in at dusk, she was sitting at the table with the paper flat in front of her and the lamp not yet lit, and he knew before he'd got his hat off that something was wrong. "Charlie? Sit down," she said. "And I need you to listen to me the way I've come to know you can listen, and not go for that rifle over the door until I'm through, because that's exactly what they want you to do." He sat. "It's a claim," Charlotte said, "against the north section, the best of your water. It says here that the original survey was filed wrong 20 years back, that the section line runs a quarter-mile south of where your fences stand, and that the land you've grazed and watered and paid taxes on your whole life was never legally yours to begin with. It's signed by the Territorial Land Office." She slid it across to him. "And it's countersigned by Mayor Amos Dunn." The name landed in the room like a dropped stone. William read it twice. His hands were very still. "Sarah's father filed that survey," he said quietly, "with his own hand. There was nothing wrong with it. I watched him do it when I was a boy." "I believe you." "Then how?" "Because a survey's just paper, William. And paper can be lost, and paper can be redrawn, and a man with an office and a friend at the land office can make the true thing disappear and put a lie in its place, and once the lie is filed, it becomes the law until somebody with more money and more time proves otherwise." Charlotte's jaw set. "Dunn didn't come at you over the ranch. He came at you over me. He stood in that yard and told you you'd regret it, and this is the shape the regret takes. He can't stand that you defied him in front of the whole town. So he means to take the thing you love and dress it up as the law." William was on his feet. "Then I'll ride into town tonight and do what shoot the mayor yell at the land office." She caught his sleeve. "That's the play, William. That's exactly the play. You're William Carter, the grieving rich man who married the fat girl and went strange. All Dunn needs is for you to lose your temper in public, put your hands on somebody. Give the town a reason to say, 'See, we told you he's not fit.' The grief broke him. Then it's not just your land they take, it's the ranch, the hands' livelihoods, all of it, and they'll do it wearing the face of good sense. A hot-headed man is the easiest man in the world to rob. He robs himself and calls it honor." William stared at her. Slowly, he sat back down. "You've thought all this through in about a minute and a half," he said. "I've spent 25 years watching people decide things about me before I open my mouth," Charlotte said. "You learn to think 2 steps ahead of cruelty, or cruelty eats you. It's the only skill being unwanted ever gave me. And thank God for it, because tonight you need it." She turned the paper around. "We don't fight this with a rifle. We fight it with paper. Dunn made it a matter of documents, so we'll beat him with documents. Somewhere in this house or in that land office, there is a copy of the true survey. The original one Sarah's father filed because the government keeps 2 of everything. We find it, we prove the filing date. We prove his is the forgery, and then it's not Carter, the crazy widower, against the good mayor. It's a proven liar and forger against a man who kept his fences honest for 40 years. That's a fight we win, but only if you keep your head." For a long moment, William said nothing. Then he reached across the table and put his big, rough hand over her small one, and she felt it trembling. Not with fear, she understood, but with the effort of holding still. "Sarah couldn't have done this," he said very low. "God love her. She was the gentlest soul I ever knew, but she'd have wept and asked me to fix it. You're not asking me to fix it. You're telling me how." He shook his head slowly. "I keep waiting to find out I picked wrong. And every day you show me I picked righter than I ever knew." Charlotte's eyes stung, but there was no time for it, and she blinked it back. "Then here's the first thing," she said. "Colton. He's been thinning your herd for months. I'd wager my life he's Dunn's man on this ranch put here last spring, right about the time you turned strange and Dunn started worrying you'd never remarry and give him something to lever you with. Colton's been feeding cattle out the back door and feeding Dunn everything that happens under this roof. Which means Dunn knows exactly what we do the moment we do it. So we don't let Colton see us do it. So we let Colton see us do the wrong thing." Charlotte almost smiled, and it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd finally been handed a fight she was built for. "We let him carry a lie back to his master, and while Dunn's chasing the lie, we go find the truth." William looked at his wife of 11 days across the lamplit table. "Charlotte Carter," he said, "remind me to never once in my life get on the wrong side of you." "You won't," she said. "You're the only person in 25 years who got on the right side of me on purpose. I don't intend to let a small, jealous man in a good coat take that away." She stood and lit the lamp at last, and the warm light filled the kitchen that had been dead 5 years, and was not dead anymore. Now, where would Sarah's father have kept his important papers? Think. A strongbox, a bank, a hidey hole. Where does a careful man put the deed to everything he owns? William was quiet, thinking back through years he'd tried hard not to walk through. "There's a box," he said slowly. "A tin box. Sarah kept it. After she passed, I couldn't. I never opened it. Couldn't bring myself to. It's still up in the—" His voice caught. "It's still in her trunk. Up in the room I don't go in." Charlotte crossed the kitchen and took both his hands. "Then tonight," she said gently, "you're going to go in, and I'll go with you if you'll have me. Because whatever's in that box, William, it's not just your salvation. It might be the last true gift Sarah's father ever left you, and I think it's high time somebody in this house stopped being afraid of the rooms the dead used to fill." William looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and picked up the lamp and held out his other hand to her. "All right?" he said. His voice was rough. "All right. But not because of the box, or Dunn, or the land." He looked at her. "Because you'll be next to me. And I reckon there's no room in this house, nor this life I couldn't walk into now, long as you're the one holding the light on the other side of it." They climbed the stairs together. And behind them, out past the corral, where the dark had come down, thick a lean figure sat his horse very still, watching the lamp move up through the windows of the house. Colton, who had seen the rider come and seen the paper handed over, and who meant to be in town by midnight with a good long story to tell the man who paid him. He did not know that the woman he'd spat in the dirt to insult had already counted him and weighed him and set him squarely in the middle of a trap with his own name on it. He thought he was the one doing the watching. He was about to learn what half the town would learn before the summer was out, that the heaviest woman in the bride line had the sharpest mind in the territory, and that William Carter, whatever the fools believed, had not chosen wrong. Up in the room he had not entered in 5 years, William set the lamp on the dresser with a shaking hand, and Charlotte knelt at the old trunk and lifted the lid, and the smell of cedar and lavender and long-kept grief rose up into the room. And there, beneath a folded quilt, a dead woman's hands had stitched, wrapped in oilcloth, and tied with string, gone brittle with age, was a flat tin box. Charlotte lifted it out and held it in both hands and looked up at her husband. "Are you ready?" she asked. William looked at the box, then at her face in the lamplight. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm ready if you're beside me. Open it, Charlie." And she did. Inside the tin box, wrapped in a square of yellowed muslin, lay a folded government survey with a red wax seal, and beneath it a letter in a firm old hand, and Charlotte's breath left her when she saw the date on the survey. "This is it," she whispered. "William, this is the true one. Filed and sealed 20 years back, 3 years before the date Dunn's forgery claims. His paper says the survey was corrected in 1867. This one's stamped 1864 and sealed by the territorial office. You can't correct a survey 3 years before it was ever drawn." She looked up, eyes shining. He got greedy with his lie. He wrote a date that this paper makes impossible. But William wasn't looking at the survey. He was looking at the letter. He had gone very pale. "That's Ezra's hand," he said. "Sarah's father. Read it." "I can't read it to me, Charlie." Charlotte read it, and what she read turned her cold, and then it turned her fierce. "To whoever reads this after I'm gone," she read. "If it's my son-in-law William, then know that in the spring of 1870, Amos Dunn came to me and offered me $400 to swear my northern line ran short, so a man he favored could file on the water. I refused him. He told me a poor memory was worth more than an honest one in this territory. I told him to get off my land. He has hated me quiet ever since. I keep this survey sealed and hid because I do not trust that man near a records office, and I fear that when I am gone and cannot speak, he will do to my daughter's inheritance what he could not do to my face. If you are reading this, William, then I was right and he has moved. God keep you. Fight him. Ezra Blackwood. The kitchen was so quiet, Charlotte could hear the clock 2 rooms over. 20 years, William said hoarsely. He's wanted this for 20 years. He waited out a good man's whole life to come at his grave. And he waited for you to be weak, Charlotte said. Grieving. Alone. He thought a broken man would never fight. He never counted on. She stopped. On you, William finished. He took her face in his hands. He never counted on you. William sat down slow at the table, the letter still in his hand, and for a long moment he couldn't speak at all. Ezra never told me, he said finally. All those years, he carried this and never said a word. Sat across this very table from me 100 Sundays, and never let on a man was circling his grandchildren's land like a wolf. He pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes. He was protecting me, even then. Even from the grave he's still. His voice broke. And I let his daughter's house go dark for 5 years. I let her father's ranch drift while I sat and grieved. If Dunn had come a year ago, he'd have found me too sunk to lift a hand. But he didn't come a year ago. Charlotte knelt by his chair and took the letter gently from him. He came now, and now there's 2 of us. Ezra wrote "Fight him, William," and he wrote it to a man he trusted to do it. Don't you sit here and tell me you failed him. You're about to do the one thing he asked. That's not failing a man. That's keeping faith with him. She pressed the letter to his chest over his heart. So let's keep it. William looked at her for a long moment, and then he covered her hand with his and nodded. And when he stood again, the grief had burned down into something harder and steadier. Charlotte's heart pounded, but she made herself think because feeling could come later, and cruelty would not wait. Listen to me. This box is everything now. This survey and this letter are the only thing standing between us and losing it all, and there's a man on this ranch tonight who'd trade them to Dunn for a handful of silver. She wrapped the papers back in the muslin. We don't sleep with these in the house where Colton can find them. First thing at dawn, one of us rides them to the county seat and files a certified copy with the circuit clerk where Dunn's got no reach. Once it's on the county record, it's out of his hands forever. He can burn every copy in Silver Creek, and it won't save him. Then we ride tonight. No. Charlotte shook her head. We ride at dawn in the open calm as churchgoers, because a man who rides out in the dark looks like a man with something to hide, and that's another story Dunn would love to tell. We do this in daylight, where the whole valley can see 2 honest people going about honest business. She pressed the wrapped papers into his hands. But tonight, we bait our hook. At supper with the window open, and Colton within earshot loitering by the woodpile, the way he always did. Charlotte said loud and clear. So it's decided. We'll bury the box out at the old well come morning, William, where nobody'd think to look, and leave it be till the lawyer sends for it. And William, God bless him, played it plain and said, Whatever you think best, Charlie. And by the time the plates were cleared, Colton's horse was gone from the corral. He took it, Boone said, coming in from the dark. Lit out south not 10 minutes ago. Didn't even saddle proper. Then he's running to Dunn with a lie, Charlotte said. And by morning, half of Silver Creek will be watching the old well for us to bury a box that's already going to be in a county safe 40 miles the other direction. She let out a breath. Boone, I need you at that well before first light. Sit where you can see it. I want to know exactly who comes to dig up nothing. The old cowhand's mustache twitched. It was as close as he came to a smile. Ma'am, in 40 years I never once enjoyed taking an order till just now. She almost laughed. And then, because she was tired and frightened, and had held herself upright all day the way she'd held herself upright her whole life, she felt the fear come up her throat at last, and she turned to the window so the men wouldn't see it. William saw it. William always saw it. He came and stood behind her, not touching, just there. "You can be scared," he said quietly. "You don't have to be the strong one every minute, not with me. I'll hold the strong end a while. That's what a husband's for." Charlotte pressed her lips together. "I've never had anybody offer to hold the strong end. I don't rightly know how to hand it over." "Then keep hold of it tonight," William said. "But know the offer stands. It'll always stand." And he put one hand on her shoulder, and she let it stay, and for a moment the fear in her chest went quiet. They rode for the county seat at first light, the two of them together, because Charlotte would not let those papers out of her own sight, and William would not let her ride 40 miles of open country alone. And it was well they went together, because they were not 5 miles down the road when a rider came up hard behind them, and Charlotte turned in the saddle and saw it was one of Colton's friends from town, spurring to catch them. "Ride on," she told William. "Don't stop. Don't let on we're carrying anything but our own selves to church." "Mornin'," the rider called, drawing even breathing hard. "Long way from home, ain't you? Where's a couple lovebirds headed so early?" "County seat," Charlotte said pleasantly. "To see about a christening gown my mother left me in her will. Sentimental thing. You're welcome to ride along and watch me weep over lace if you've the stomach for it." The man's eyes went to her saddlebag. "Heard tell you had some other business over that way. Did you?" Charlotte smiled. "Well, you heard tell I'd bury a box at the old well too, didn't you? And I hear a good number of Silver Creek's finest spent a fine evening digging up worms out there by lantern light." She let that land. "You go on back and tell whoever's paying you to spread stories that Mrs. Carter said good morning and that she hopes he sleeps well, because I surely do." And she clucked to her horse and rode on, and the man sat his mount in the middle of the road, red-faced, and did not follow. "He'll tell Dunn we came this way," William said low. "Let him. By the time Dunn works out why, it'll be filed and sealed and past his reach." She patted the Bible in her saddlebag. "A lie travels fast, William. But the truth, once it's written down and sealed by a clerk who's never heard of Amos Dunn, the truth doesn't travel at all. It just sits there being true where he can't touch it forever." They filed the certified copy that afternoon before a county clerk who stamped it, sealed it, and wrote it into a great leather book without once looking up at Charlotte's face, which was, Charlotte thought, the first blessed hour in her whole life that a stranger's eyes had not gone to her body first. In the eyes of the county record, she was not a fat woman or a plain one. She was Mrs. Charlotte Carter, and her business was in order, and that was all. She kept the receipt folded in her mother's Bible the whole ride home, touching it now and again like a talisman. But the quiet did not last. It broke 3 days later, and it broke in town in front of everyone exactly the way Charlotte had feared it would. They had done everything right. The certified copy was filed in the county seat, sealed, and recorded beyond Dunn's reach. Charlotte had the receipt folded in her Bible. By every measure of law and reason, they had already won. And Amos Dunn, who had waited 20 years and would not be beaten by a fat woman with a filing receipt, changed the game the only way a losing man can. He stopped fighting about the land. He started fighting about her. It began at the church social, which Charlotte had not wanted to attend, and William had insisted on, because he said, "We hide from this town one Sunday, and we hand 'em the story that we're ashamed. We are not ashamed, so we go, and we hold our heads up, and we let 'em choke on it." And she had loved him so much in that moment, she'd put on her good dress and gone. They had been there an hour when Dunn stood up on the church steps and called for the town's attention. "Friends," he said, warm as a snake in the sun, "I won't spoil the fellowship, but some of you have asked me private whether it's true what's said about the Carter place, and I'll not lie to good people. There's a claim on that land, a legal question about the survey, and I know William's a proud man and grieving still, God help him, so I'll only say this. When a man's judgment fails him so badly, he passes over 10 decent Christian women to marry a. And here he let his eyes go to Charlotte, slow, deliberate, so the whole crowd's eyes would follow, to marry what he married well. It does make a body wonder what else that judgment's gotten wrong. Wonder whether the poor man's fit to hold a ranch at all. The crowd murmured, and Charlotte felt every eye in that churchyard swing to her, weighing her, measuring her, deciding the way eyes had decided about her for 25 years, that she was the flaw, the mistake, the thing that proved the man beside her broken. William's hand went white-knuckled around his hat. "Amos," he started, and his voice had the dangerous edge in it, the very edge Charlotte had warned him about, the edge that would hand Dunn the whole game. "William?" Charlotte caught his arm. "Don't. That's the trap. That's the whole trap." A woman near the front, one of the church ladies, a Mrs. Fletcher with a face like a closed purse, leaned to her neighbor and said, not quite quiet enough, "Well, you can't argue with the man. You've only to look at her to know something's wrong with the poor fellow's mind." And a few people laughed. That low, easy churchyard laugh. The one Charlotte had heard her whole life. But not everyone laughed. At the edge of the crowd, Widow Hartley planted her cane and pushed herself upright, and her old voice cut across the yard like a blade. "Amos Dunn, I knew your mother, and she'd have taken a switch to you for what you just said on the steps of the Lord's own house. There's not a soul in this valley eats better or gets treated kinder since that girl came to the Carter place. You call that madness. Then I pray to God the sickness spreads." The laughter died. But it didn't turn. Charlotte saw that clearly the town wasn't with Dunn exactly, but it wasn't with her either. It was doing what towns do. It was waiting to see who won before it decided what it had always believed. But something had cracked in her too. Because she had believed foolishly, she saw now that if she was good enough and clever enough and won cleanly enough, that the town might one day look at her and see a wife. And she understood, standing in that churchyard, with 100 faces turned against her, that they never would. That she could save the ranch and still cost William everything, because as long as she was beside him, this town would call him broken and hunt him, and never, ever stop. She got through the social. She smiled. She held her head up the way he'd asked. And she came home and she waited until the house was dark, and then she took down her carpet bag. William found her packing. "Charlie." He stood in the doorway. "What in God's name are you doing?" "I'm doing the only sum that adds up." Her voice was steady, and that was the worst of it, how steady it was. "You heard him today. As long as I'm here, he's got a stick to beat you with. Fit to hold a ranch," he said. "He'll say it to the circuit judge, William. He'll say it to the land office. The married the fat girl and went strange story. It's the whole of his case now, and I am the story. Take me away and you take away his last card. You keep the land. You keep your good name. You marry some quiet, plain woman this town approves of, and in 5 years nobody remembers I was ever—" "Stop." William's voice cracked like a whip. "Stop it. Don't you finish that sentence. It's the truth." "It is not the truth. It's the oldest lie you know, and you learned it so young you can't tell it from your own bones." He crossed the room. "You think you're saving me. You're not. You're doing the thing every cruel soul who ever met you spent your whole life training you to do. You're leaving before they can throw you out. You're calling it my sake, but it ain't for my sake, Charlotte, and I think somewhere in you you know it. Don't." Her hands shook on the carpet bag. "Don't you dare. Then hear me." He took the bag from her hands and set it down. "You want to know the one true thing in all of this? Amos Dunn didn't put a single doubt in my head today. Not one. The whole town could turn out and swear I was mad, and it wouldn't move me an inch, because I know what I know. There's exactly one person in this valley who ever believed you didn't belong here." He held her eyes. "And she's standing in front of me with a bag in her hand. It was never the town, Charlie. The town's just noise. The only person who never believed you belonged here is you." Charlotte stood very still. "I chose you in front of everybody." William said quieter now. "I stood down Dunn for you twice. I'd stand him down 100 more times and count it the best work of my life. But I cannot stand between you and the one enemy I can't reach. I can't fight the voice in your own head that tells you you're too much, that tells you to run before you're sent. Only you can fight that one. And if you walk out that door tonight, it won't be Dunn that beat us." His voice went rough. "It'll be that voice. It'll have finally won. And I'll have lost you to it, same as I lost Sarah to the fever, to a thing I'd have died to fight and never got the chance to." Charlotte's face crumpled. 25 years of holding herself upright, and it went all at once. "I don't know how to stay," she wept. "William, I don't know how. Every single time I've let myself believe I belonged somewhere, they've made me pay for it. Every time. And it hurts less to leave first. It always hurts less to leave first. I know it does." He pulled her against his chest, and she let him, and she cried into his shirt the way she had not cried since her mother died. "I know. But less hurt ain't the same as more life, Charlie. You've had a lifetime of the arrangement that hurts least. I'm asking you to try the one that hurts and heals both the one with me in it, because I promise you on Sarah's grave and my mother's ring that whatever this town throws, I will stand in front of it every day, till one of us is in the ground. Just don't make me stand in front of an empty house. That's the one thing I can't do. I already did 5 years of that. I can't go back." "Yiki, ban in?" "Si." She clutched his shirt. "You'd really fight them. For years. For me." "There is nothing," William Carter said, "in this whole territory I would rather do with the rest of my life than fight for the right to keep settin' that fourth chair at the table." Charlotte looked up at him, and something 25 years in the making finally gave way inside her. "My mother was the only one," she whispered. "The only person who ever fought for me. And when she died, I thought that was the end of it. That nobody would ever stand between me and the world again, and I'd best get used to standing there alone, because that's what a woman like me got. That's all a woman like me got." Her voice shook. "And then a stranger in a leather vest walked past 9 pretty girls and asked me my name. And I'd do it again this minute," William said, 1,000 times over. "I believe you." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "God help me, William, after a lifetime of learning not to. I believe you. And that's the most frightening thing that's ever happened to me." She let out a broken laugh. "It's easier to be thrown out. Did you know that? It's easier to be the one nobody wanted than to be wanted, and have it be real. Because real can be lost. Nobody can take away a thing you never let yourself have." "Then let yourself have it," William said softly. "And I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you never lose it. That's my half of the bargain. Your half is just to stay and find out I meant it." And Charlotte Carter, who had come to Silver Creek asking nothing but a chance to survive, unpacked her carpetbag. She did not know, folding her good dress back into the drawer, that the fight William swore to was closer than either of them dreamed. She did not know that at that very hour, in a lamplit office in town, Amos Dunn was learning that his forgery had been beaten to the county record, that his spy Colton had led half of Silver Creek to dig up an empty well and made fools of them all, and that the fat woman he'd mocked from the church steps had outthought him at every turn. She did not know that a beaten man is at his most dangerous. She learned it at dawn. Boone came pounding up onto the porch before the sun was full up, and he did not knock. He threw the door open, and his face told the story before his mouth did. "They're comin'," he said. "Done. And he's brought the marshal and a paper and half the town behind him for witnesses. He's not waiting on the circuit judge, Miss Charlie. He's found himself another way." Boone's chest heaved. "He's callin' it an inquest. Sayin' William ain't of sound mind to hold property. Sayin' the whole territory can see it plain as day by lookin' at who he married. He means to have a marshal declare William unfit this very mornin' and take the ranch into the town's keeping. Into his keeping. And there's a wagon of folks coming up the road right now to watch it done." William was already reaching for his hat. Charlotte caught his wrist. "How many?" She asked Boone, and her voice was steel. "Done the marshal maybe 20 townsfolk. And Colton's riding with them bold as brass." Charlotte was quiet 1 heartbeat. 2. And then something settled over her face that William had not seen there before. Not fear, not fury, but the cold, clear, terrible calm of a woman who has just been handed at last the fight she was born for, on ground of her enemy's own choosing. "An inquest," she said softly. "In the open, with witnesses, with the marshal watching." A slow breath. "William. He thinks he's brought a firing squad to our door. He doesn't know he's just built me a courtroom and put himself in the dock and invited the whole town to sit the jury." She turned to her husband and took his face in both her hands. "Get the Bible. the one with the county receipt folded inside. And Ezra's letter, the real one. The copy's safe in the county safe, but I want them looking at his very hand. We're not going to hide from this inquest, William. Her eyes blazed. We're going to win it, in front of every last soul that ever laughed at me. And out on the road, faint at first, and then unmistakable, came the sound of many horses and many wheels, and Amos Dunn's voice carrying across the morning, calling out for William Carter to come out and answer for his madness before God and the town of Silver Creek. Charlotte Carter picked up her mother's Bible, squared her shoulders, and walked out the front door to meet them. They came into the yard, the way a mob always comes, loud and certain, and Amos Dunn rode at the head of them with a paper held high like a preacher holds a Bible. And beside him rode a lean gray man with a marshal's star pinned to his coat and a face that gave away nothing at all. "William Carter," Dunn called out. "We've come on lawful business, and I'll ask you to answer it lawful. This is Marshal Reed, come all the way from the territorial seat. There's a question of your fitness to hold property, and it's going to be settled here this morning in front of these witnesses. Come down off that porch and answer for yourself." William started forward. Charlotte stopped him with one hand flat on his chest. "I'll answer for us," she said low. "You've got a temper he wants to see. I've got a mind he doesn't know I have. Let me." And she stepped down off the porch alone. "Marshal Reed," Charlotte said, walking straight up to the gray man's horse and looking him full in the face. "My name is Charlotte Carter. I'm the woman Mayor Dunn keeps calling proof my husband's lost his mind. I expect you rode a long way on that theory. Before you spend another hour of the territory's money on it, would you do me the courtesy of answering one honest question, marshal to citizen?" The gray man looked down at her. Something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that the madman's wife had walked up bold as a bank president. "Ask it." "Did Mayor Dunn tell you this was about my husband's mind? Or did he tell you it was about his land?" The marshal's jaw shifted. "He said fitness. Then he lied to a federal officer to get you out here, and I can prove it in about 4 minutes if you'll hold these good people still that long." She turned to the crowd and raised her voice so it carried to the very back of the wagons. "You've all come to watch a fitness inquest. Fine, then let's have one. But we're going to inquest into the fitness of every man in this yard, not just my husband, starting with the one who called it." A ripple went through the crowd. Dunn's face darkened. "This is exactly the kind of unhinged," he began. "Marshal." Charlotte didn't raise her voice. She lowered it, and somehow that carried further. "3 days ago, the mayor filed a claim against my husband's north section, alleging the original survey was corrected in 1867. She held up the sealed survey. "This is that original survey. Territorial seal red wax filed and stamped by the Land Office in 1864. I'd ask you to note the date, and then I'd ask any man here who can do arithmetic to tell me how a survey gets corrected 3 years before it was ever drawn." The marshal reached down. Charlotte handed it up. He studied the seal a long moment, turned it to the light, and his gray face went very still. "That's a genuine territorial seal," he said quietly. "I've stamped 10,000 of them. You don't counterfeit these easy." "No, you don't," Charlotte agreed. "But you can counterfeit a correction date if you're a mayor with a friend at the land office and 20 years of spite to spend. Which brings me to my second exhibit." She held up the letter. "This was written by Ezra Blackwood, my husband's father-in-law, the man who filed that survey dead these 5 years. Marshal, I'd be obliged if you'd read it aloud in your own voice so no one can say the Carters put words in a dead man's mouth." The marshal took the letter. He read it. And as he read it aloud, the $400, the offer to swear a false line, a poor memory's worth, more than an honest one, get off my land. The yard went dead silent, and every face in it turned slow toward Amos Dunn. "That's a fabrication," Dunn said, but his voice had gone thin. "Any woman clever enough to? She wrote it herself, Marshal. Look at her. She's the kind that—" "That's Ezra's hand," said an old voice from the crowd. Widow Hartley, who had come up in her little cart at the back, pushed forward on her cane. "I've read 40 years of that man's Christmas letters, Amos Dunn. I'd know his hand in the dark. That's Ezra Blackwood, or I'm the Queen of England. So would I, said Boone, stepping up. Signed my wages in that hand for 30 years. And then a third voice from a young rancher near the front. My daddy always said Dunn tried to buy a false line off him back in the 70s. I thought it was just talk. He looked at Dunn. Weren't just talk, was it, Amos? The crowd's murmur was turning now, and Charlotte felt it turn the way you feel weather change. But she was not done. She had learned over a lifetime that a cornered man throws one last thing, and she meant to be standing where it couldn't land. And Dunn threw it. That letter proves nothing, he said, rallying, drawing himself up in the saddle. A grudge from 20 years back. Marshal, the fact remains the land office in this very county holds a filed correction dated and stamped, and it says exactly what my claim says. You can ride in and read it yourself. My paper matches the government's own record. Hers is one sealed survey and a dead man's grudge. The law goes by what's on file, and what's on file backs me. He almost smiled. So unless this clever woman means to tell us the United States Land Office is lying, I mean to tell you the man who runs it is. Charlotte didn't blink. Marshal, the correction on file was entered by a clerk named Harmon Pike. I know that because it's written on the mayor's own claim right there in your coat pocket. Go on, look. Per correction, entered by Clerk H. Pike. Now here's a thing I'd like the whole town to hear. Harmon Pike bought 40 acres of good bottomland 2 years ago on a clerk's wages of $30 a month. She let that sit. You do the sum. Marshal, a clerk doesn't buy bottomland on $30 a month. Not unless somebody's paying him on the side to enter corrections that were never true. You want the forgery? Don't take my word. Ride to the land office, pull the correction, and hold the ink to the light. Fresh ink doesn't age. A 2-year-old lie pretending to be 20 years old will tell on itself the second the sun hits it. She nodded at the survey in his hand. Dunn beat me to the government record, but he didn't beat me to the county record. I filed a certified copy of this true survey at the county seat 3 days ago, sealed and dated, where he's got no clerk to bribe. 2 records now say 2 different things, Marshal. One of us forged, and only one of us filed the truth in a place the other couldn't reach. Her eyes went hard. So ask yourself, which is the guilty hand, the one that hid the truth 40 miles off where Dunn couldn't burn it, or the one that paid a clerk to bury a lie right here at home? The marshal looked from the sealed survey to Amos Dunn, and the last of the doubt went out of his gray face. That's a real easy thing to check, he said quietly. And you're mighty eager for me not to, Amos, for a man who swears the record backs him. Dunn's mouth worked, but nothing came. There's one more matter, Marshal, Charlotte said, and then I'll let you get to your business. The mayor didn't do this alone. He put a man on this ranch a year ago to feed him our doings and thin our herd out the back door, 60-odd head gone off the tally since last spring sold quiet the money split. That man is standing right there. She pointed. Colton. Riding with the mayor this morning, bold as brass. Marshal, if you want to test whether I've got a mind or a madness, here's your test. Ask Colton where those cattle went, and watch his face while he answers. Every eye swung to Colton, and Colton, who had spent a year certain no one on this ranch could catch him, made the mistake cornered men always make. He looked at Dunn. He looked to the mayor to save him, and the whole yard saw him do it. Don't look at me, boy. Dunn snapped too fast, too sharp, and it was the worst thing he could have said, and Charlotte watched the trap close on the sound of it. He told you not to look at him, the marshal said slowly, before anybody named what you'd done. Now why would an innocent man say that? Colton's mouth worked. His horse shifted under him. I ain't taking this alone. You hear me? I did what I was paid to do, and it was him paying. It was done. The cattle, the survey, the man he sent to lift the box, all of it, he said, Carter'd never fight. He said the grievin' had made him soft. He said the fat wife would run inside a month and then... Colton's voice cracked. It was all him. I just held the pencil. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the county. Amos Dunn sat his horse in the middle of the yard he'd meant to seize in front of the town he'd meant to lead, and watched 20 years of patient poisonous scheming come apart in the space of a single confession. His mouth opened. No lie came out. For the first time in his life, Charlotte thought the man had run clean out of story. "Marshall Reed," Charlotte said quietly, "I believe your inquest into fitness has reached a finding. I'll leave it to you which man in this yard it landed on." The marshal swung down off his horse. He did not go to William. He walked slow and heavy to Amos Dunn, and he reached up and took the false claim out of the mayor's hand, and he folded it and put it in his own coat. "Amos Dunn," he said, "I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of forgery of a territorial land record conspiracy and cattle theft. You'll answer for it in front of the circuit judge, and God help you, because that man's got no patience at all for officials who dirty the office." He looked at Colton. "You too, son, though it'll go easier on you, seeing as you found your honesty before the judge had to pry it out." And it was done. Just like that, after all of it, it was done. Dunn found his voice at last, but it was not the mayor's voice anymore. Warm and certain, it was small, and it was mean, and it was aimed as such men always aim, at the softest thing he could see. "You think you've won something?" He spat at Charlotte as the marshal took hold of his reins. "You think this town's going to love you now? They'll never see you as anything but what you are. You saved his land. Fine. You'll die the fat woman he pitied, and everybody in this valley will—" "Marshal," William Carter said, and he came down off that porch at last, and he stood beside his wife, and his voice was very calm and very cold. "You've got him for forgery and thieving. Add whatever the law calls a man who slanders another man's wife in his own yard, and I'll press it to the last dollar." He looked at Dunn. "You don't get to say another word about her. You lost that right when you rode up my road. Now get." And the marshal led Amos Dunn away down the road he'd come up so proud, and the town of Silver Creek watched him go, and one by one they turned back to look at the fat woman standing on the steps with a Bible in her hand, and Charlotte watched them look, and she waited for the shame to come up her neck the way it always had. It didn't come, because for the first time in her life she had not been rescued. She had done the rescuing. And there is a thing that happens in a person the first time they save someone else, with the very quality the world spent a lifetime punishing them for, a thing that no amount of cruelty can take back once it's happened. The young rancher who'd spoken up was the first to come forward. He took his hat off, actually took it off to her and said, "Mrs. Carter, ma'am, my daddy died still angry Dunn near ruined him. I'd be proud to shake the hand that finally brought it home, if you'd allow it." Charlotte allowed it. And then Mrs. Fletcher, of all people, the church lady with the closed purse face, came up stiff and awkward, and said she reckoned she'd spoken hasty at the social, and hoped there were no hard feelings. And Charlotte, who could have said a great many true things about hasty church ladies, looked her in the eye and said only, "Mrs. Fletcher, I've found there's not much profit in hard feelings. Come out to the ranch sometime. I'll put coffee on." And the woman's face did something it hadn't done in years, which was soften. They didn't all come around. Charlotte knew they wouldn't, and she'd stopped needing them to. But enough of them did that morning that the shape of the valley changed not all at once, but the way a river changes course one grain of sand at a time, until one day the water runs somewhere new, and nobody can quite remember it ever ran the other way. When the last of them had gone and the dust had settled on the road, and it was only the two of them and old Boone left standing in the quiet yard, William turned to his wife. "You want to tell me," he said, "how you knew Colton'd look at Dunn? I didn't know he'd look. I knew he'd hope." Charlotte let out a long breath, and she felt the whole morning catch up to her all at once. A man like Colton never fears the law half so much as he fears the man who pays him. So I made him choose out loud in front of everyone between the two. And when a scared man has to choose fast between his boss and his own neck. She shook her head. He'll pick his neck every time. Loyalty's cheap when it's bought. I've watched cheap loyalty fold my whole life. I only had to point it at the right man. Boone let out a low whistle. "Miss Charlie, I have shot at rustlers. I have fought a range fire with a wet blanket, and I have wrestled a bull calf into a branding chute. And I ain't ever in my life been as glad to be on somebody's side as I am to be on yours." He tipped his hat deep and went to see to the horses and left them alone. And that was when Charlotte with the danger finally passed, and no one left to be strong for sat down hard on the porch steps and began quietly to shake. William sat down beside her. He didn't say anything. He just put his arm around her, and she let herself lean into him, all of her. The whole weight the world had spent 25 years telling her was too much, and he held it like it was nothing, like it was the easiest thing in the world, like he'd been waiting his whole life to be handed exactly that much of somebody. "I keep waiting for it to be a trick," she whispered. "This whole life, I keep waiting to wake up back in that boarding house in St. Louis, with all of this being some fever dream a lonely girl had. Because things like this don't happen to girls like me. They just don't, William. We don't get the ranch and the good man and the town brought to heel. We get the back stairs and the leftover plate and the quiet." "You're not dreamin'," William said. "And you didn't get any of this. You built it. There's a difference, and I need you to hear it." He turned her face to his. "A dream gets handed to you. What you did this morning, you earned with your own mind and your own nerve. Nobody gave you a thing. You took it. And nobody, not this town, not Dunn, not the voice in your own head, nobody can untake a thing you earned." Charlotte looked at him a long moment. And then, because the morning had cracked something open in her that had been shut for a quarter century, she told him the thing she had never told a living soul. "There were 7 families," she said quietly, "in St. Louis. 7 over the years that were meant to take me on. Housework mostly, kitchen work. And every one of them let me go inside a month, and it was they always found a nicer way to say it, but it always came down to the same thing. That I was an eyesore. That guests didn't want to see me. That a girl my size in the front rooms made the house look poor." Her voice was steady, and that was the worst of it. "By the 7th, I stopped unpacking. I'd take the position, and I'd live out of my carpet bag ready, because I knew. I always knew. I got so I could feel the letting go coming a week before it came, like weather in an old wound." She looked at her hands. "That's why I had the bag out so quick the other night. 25 years of practice. I can pack to leave a place faster than most women can decide what to wear to it." William was quiet a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick. "Then here's what we're gonna do," he said. "Tomorrow, I'm gonna take that carpet bag, and I'm gonna carry it out to the barn, and I'm gonna hang it up on a nail so high you'd need a ladder to reach it. And it's gonna stay there empty, gathering dust for the rest of our natural lives. Not because I'd ever stop you leaving if you truly wanted to go, but because I want you to have to think about it. I want leaving to be hard. I want it to take a ladder and a good long climb and plenty of time to change your mind." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You've spent your whole life packed and ready to run. I aim to make you a home so heavy you couldn't leave it in a hurry if you tried." Charlotte laughed, wet and cracked and real. "You're going to hang my bag from a nail." "High one," William said, "highest in the barn." And she laughed again and cried at the same time, and the two of them sat on the porch steps of a house that had been dead for 5 years and was the fullest, warmest, most stubbornly living thing in the whole valley now. And neither one of them said anything for a while, because some things don't need saying once they've been shown. That evening she made supper, and for the first time she set 4 places at the table without thinking about it. Without the old flinch one for William, one for herself, and 2 more because Boone stayed to eat now most nights, and because a house that had learned to be a home did not like to sit half empty anymore. And late, when the lamp was low, William told her the thing he had never told anyone either. "When Sarah was dying," he said, "at the very end she made me promise something, and I never told a soul 'cause it shamed me how I broke it." He turned his cup slowly in his hands. "She said, 'Will, don't you dare turn this house into a shrine. Don't you spend your good years grieving a dead woman. You find somebody, and you let 'em in, and you live.'" He shook his head. "And I did the opposite. Turned it into exactly the shrine she told me not to. 5 years. I kept her chair pulled out and her picture dusted and this whole ranch pinned under glass like a museum of a marriage that was already over. I broke my own dying wife's last wish out of pure cowardice, and I called it love. 'cause that was easier than admittin' I was just too scared to live. Charlotte reached across the table and took his hand. "And then Mrs. Pennywell's wagon came into town," she said softly. "And then Mrs. Pennywell's wagon came into town." He looked up at her, and his tired eyes were wet, and something in them was finally, after 5 years, at peace. "And I rode in meanin' to do my duty, and pick some quiet girl, and go on livin' half a life. And I walked down that line, and there you were at the end of it, tellin' the richest man in Montana to choose somebody else." His voice broke. "And I swear to you, Charlie, standin' there, I heard Sarah. Plain as if she was next to me. I heard her say that one. Will. Her. That's the one I meant. And I finally kept my promise to my dyin' wife by fallin' for a woman she never met, and would have loved like a sister." Charlotte was crying now and not hiding it. "So don't you ever tell me again that girls like you don't get the good man and the ranch and the whole life," William said. "'Cause you didn't just get it. You gave it back to me, too. You brought a dead man's house back to life. You kept a widow's promise she couldn't keep herself. And you did it all while half the territory was laughing at you." He lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips. "The town's gonna spend 20 years wondering why I chose you. Let 'em wonder. You and me, we already know. I didn't choose you despite being broke down and grievin'." He held her eyes. "I chose you because some part of me knew you were the only soul in that line who'd know how to put a broken thing back together. Because you'd spent your whole life being the broken thing everyone threw away. And who else on God's earth would know better how it's done?" Charlotte couldn't speak. She got up and she came around the table, and she put her arms around her husband from behind and pressed her wet face into his neck. And William Carter reached up and held her arms where they crossed over his chest, and the clock ticked 2 rooms over. And for once, for the first time in either of their lives, neither one of them was listening to how quiet the house was. Because it wasn't quiet anymore. It was full. The trial came in this fall, and it did not take long. Amos Dunn stood before the circuit judge with his forgery held to the light just as Charlotte had promised, and the fresh ink told on itself exactly as she'd said it would. And Harmon Pike, the clerk, folded even faster than Colton had, once the judge fixed him with a hard eye and mentioned the word penitentiary. Dunn got 7 years. The town that had ridden out to watch him seize the Carter Ranch stayed home the day they took him to the territorial prison, and nobody waved. But a man like Dunn leaves a hole when he goes, and Charlotte knew better than most that holes get filled. The only question is by what. It was Boone who brought the first sign of it in the dead of the following winter, stamping snow off his boots at the kitchen door. "There's talk in town," he said. "Bad talk. The Cattlemen's Trust down in the county seat's been buying up paper, mortgages, notes. Every loan half the ranchers in this valley signed in the fat years. The trust bought 'em all up quiet, and now they're calling 'em due, all at once. Middle of the worst winter in 20 years, when there's not a man in the valley with cash to pay." Charlotte set down the coffee pot very slowly. "Who runs the trust?" she asked. Boone's jaw worked. "Fella named Vance. Come up from Charleston, they say. Bought his way in last spring." And Charlotte went still because she knew that name. "Vance," she said. "Priscilla Vance, the girl who stood next to me in that line, of the Charleston Vances." She almost laughed, and there was no humor in it. "Her brother, I'd wager, or her father. She went home from Silver Creek humiliated, and it seems the Vances don't forget a humiliation any more than Dunn did." She looked at William. "This isn't about money. A man doesn't buy up a whole valley's debt to make money off ranchers who can't pay. He does it to own them. To take the land cheap when they default the way Dunn tried to take ours." She sat down slow. "Dunn came for one ranch and one wife. This one's come for the whole valley. And every family in it signed the paper themselves in a good year, so it's all legal, every bit of it. There's no forgery to catch this time. It's just the law turned into a knife." "Then there's nothing to be done," William said quietly. "If it's legal, there's always something to be done." Charlotte was already pulling her shawl on. "Legal isn't the same as unbeatable. Dunn taught me that. Get the wagon, William, And send Boone round to every ranch between here and town. Tell them there's a meeting at the church tomorrow. Tell them Mrs. Carter's got something to say about the trust, and they'd best come hungry because I'll have made enough to feed the lot of them, and a man thinks clearer with food in him." William looked at her a long moment, and then something like pride kindled behind his tired eyes. "You know they'll come," he said. "2 years ago, half of 'em wouldn't have crossed the road for you. Now they'll ride through a blizzard because you said to." "I know," Charlotte said softly. "That's the strangest part of my whole life, William. I've stopped being able to feel surprised by it. They came. 30 families threw snow to the horses' knees, and they packed into the little white church where 2 years before Dunn had mocked her from the steps, and they turned their weathered, frightened faces to the fat woman standing at the front, and they waited for her to tell them what to do. "I'll say the hard part first," Charlotte told them. "Because you're grown people, and you didn't ride through a blizzard to be coddled. Every note the trust holds is good paper. You signed it. If it comes to a courtroom on the plain question of, do you owe the money, you lose all of you, and they take your land for pennies, and there's not a judge in the territory can stop it. That's the truth, and anybody who tells you different is selling you comfort you can't afford." The room sagged. A woman near the back began to weep. "But," Charlotte let the word ring, "I've spent 2 years reading every scrap of law I could get my hands on because a woman who's beaten one land grab tends to lie awake nights wondering when the next one's coming. And I want to know one thing before we give up. How many of you signed your notes right here in Silver Creek with old Dunn or the bank he kept his thumb on?" Hands went up, nearly every hand in the room. "That's what I thought." Charlotte's eyes sharpened. "Because Amos Dunn is in the territorial prison this minute for forging land records and paying a clerk to bury lies. A man convicted of falsifying the very documents these notes were filed alongside. And I'd bet my life, I'd bet this ranch that a bank that corrupt didn't keep clean books on anything. Dunn shaved cattle off my account with a pencil. You think he didn't shave interest onto your notes the same way? You think every one of those loans was recorded honest by an honest hand, at the rate you actually agreed to?" She swept the room. "The trust bought your paper cheap because they think it's iron. I think a good deal of it was written by proven forgers and crooked clerks, and I think if we open every one of those notes to the daylight, compare what you remember signing to what's actually filed, we're going to find that half of them can't survive being looked at hard. And a note that can't survive being looked at is a note we can fight." A rancher stood up. "And who's going to do all that looking, Mrs. Carter? Who reads well enough and knows the law well enough and has the sand to stand up to a Charleston bank with a wall of lawyers?" The room went quiet. Charlotte looked at them. 30 families. The same valley that had laughed at her from that very churchyard. "I am," she said simply. "If you'll have me, I'll read every note. I'll find every crooked figure Dunn's people ever wrote. And I'll stand up in that courtroom myself in front of every lawyer the Vances can buy, and I will make them prove line by line, dollar by dollar, that they're owed a single honest cent." She squared her shoulders. "I've been underestimated my whole life. I've watched proud men look at me and decide there was nothing behind my eyes worth fearing. It has cost every last one of them dear, and I intend for it to cost the Cattlemen's Trust most of all." "And why would you?" A woman called out, not unkind, just honest, a hard-faced rancher's wife, who had never troubled to hide what she'd once thought of Charlotte. "That's what I don't follow, Mrs. Carter. Half of us in this room said things about you 2 years back that we're ashamed to remember now. You don't owe this valley a thing. If it were me, I'd let the trust take the lot of you and count it justice." She folded her arms. "So why?" The room held its breath because it was the question none of them had dared ask, and they all wanted to know. Charlotte was quiet a moment. "Because I know exactly what it is to stand at the end of a line," she said finally, "and watch everybody decide your fate over your head like you're not even there. To have a thing you can't afford to lose taken from you by someone stronger, while a whole crowd of good folks looks on and does nothing because it's easier." She met the woman's eyes. "You're right. Half of you did me wrong. But I'm not doing this for the half that laughed. I'm doing it for the girl I used to be, the one nobody ever once stood up for. I couldn't save her. She's long gone. Her voice softened. But I can be for 30 families in a hard winter the thing that nobody was for me. And I find that's worth more to me than justice. It always was. For a moment nobody moved. And then old Widow Hartley from the front pew thumped her cane on the floorboards once hard. "Well," she barked at the room, "what are you waiting on? The woman just offered to walk into a lion's den for the lot of you. Somebody say yes before she comes to her senses." And the room said yes. Not with a vote. With a sound, a low, rolling murmur of assent that built into something Charlotte had never once in her life been on the receiving end of a whole room full of people deciding all at once that they believed in her. She had to turn away and busy herself with the coffee so they wouldn't see her face. The winter that followed was the hardest work Charlotte had ever done, and she had done hard work her whole life. Every night the kitchen table disappeared under stacks of notes and ledgers, and the county's own filing records, which she'd had certified copies of, made she never again in her life would fight a paper war without her own sealed copies safe in the county safe. And one by one, exactly as she'd promised, the crooked figures came out of hiding under her pencil. "Look here," she told William one night near midnight, her eyes red from the lamplight. "The Halloran note. Signed at 8%. Mrs. Halloran remembers it plain, she cried telling me. Filed at 14. Somebody added a stroke to the 8 and made it a 4 and moved it in front. 6 points of interest forged onto a widow's mortgage on 10 years of a note." She sat back. "That's not a loan anymore, William. That's a robbery with a pen, and it's on 9 notes so far that I can prove, and I'm not half through the stack." William came and stood behind her chair and put his hands on her shoulders. "You're working yourself to the bone, Charlie." "I know. And in your condition—" Charlotte went still. She hadn't told him. She'd meant to wait until she was sure, until it was safe, because a woman who'd been disappointed by every good thing in her life learned to hold hope at arm's length until it couldn't be taken back. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "I've buried one wife and watched her carry a child that didn't live," William said very gently. "I know the look of a woman in the early months. I've known 3 weeks. I've been waiting on you to tell me, and letting you have your privacy till you did." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "I'd never have let you ride to that meeting through the snow if I'd thought it'd hurt you. But I watched you stand up in that church and give 30 families their spine back, and I thought, no, this is exactly what she'd want the child to come into. A mother who fights, not one who folds." Charlotte reached up and covered his hand with hers, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "I was so afraid to tell you," she whispered, "because everything good in my life used to be the setup for something being taken away. And this is the most good thing that's ever. William, I'm nearly out of my mind with being happy and being terrified both at once, and I don't know how to hold that much of anything." "You hold it the same way you've held everything," William said. "One day at a time, and not alone." He came around and knelt by her chair, this big weathered cowboy down on the kitchen floor at midnight, and he put his rough hand flat against her and looked up at her face. "There's going to be a Carter in that 4th chair, Charlie, a real one. And that child is going to grow up in a house that's warm in a valley that respects its mother, and it is never not for one single day of its life. Gonna know what it feels like to be the one at the end of the line that nobody wants." His voice broke. "You're going to give our child the exact opposite of your whole childhood. You know that. That's the thing you get to do now. That's the thing you earned." Charlotte put her hand over his, and she wept, and this time not one tear of it was grief. But there was a courtroom still to face, and she faced it in the spring, 6 months along, and unable to hide it, walking into the county courthouse in her good dress, with a wall of Charleston lawyers on one side, and 30 ranch families packed into the gallery behind her, come to watch the woman they'd bet everything on. The trust's lead lawyer was a smooth young man who took one look at her and made the same mistake every proud man in her life had made. "Your Honor," he said, almost pitying, I'm not certain the lady understands the complexity of what she's undertaken. These are sophisticated financial instruments. Perhaps the court might appoint proper counsel for these poor people, someone with the training to— The lady, Charlotte said, rising, understands the instruments fine. It's the arithmetic the trust seems to have trouble with, and I'd be pleased to walk the court through it slow so nobody feels rushed. She lifted the first note. Exhibit 1. The Halloran Mortgage, signed at 8%, filed at 14%. I have Mrs. Halloran's sworn statement, and I have the county's certified copy of the original filing, and I have the note itself, and I have a magnifying glass. Your Honor, if the court would care to examine where the 8 was doctored into a 4, because I found the same hand doing the same trick on 11 separate notes, the trust is trying to collect this morning, every one of them written out of the same corrupt bank that put Amos Dunn in the penitentiary. Wait. She turned and looked at the wall of lawyers, and she smiled, pleasant as a Sunday. You bought a great many stolen watches, gentlemen, and now you've brought them all into a courtroom and asked a judge to make everybody pay you for the time. I intend to show him one by one exactly whose pockets they came out of. It took 2 days. 2 days of Charlotte Carter standing before the bench, one note at a time, her sworn statements and her certified copies and her magnifying glass, while the smooth young lawyer's confidence bled out of him, figure by figure, and the judge's face grew darker by the hour. On the second morning, the trust's lawyer tried the only card he had left. Your Honor, even granting a few clerical errors, and I concede nothing, the bulk of these notes are sound. The trust purchased them in good faith. We can hardly be held to account for the sins of a bank we never owned. We are innocent buyers. Innocent buyers. Charlotte rose, slow, one hand at the small of her back. Your Honor, may I ask the gentleman a question through the court? The judge nodded. You bought this paper last spring, Charlotte said, after Amos Dunn was convicted, after the whole territory read in the papers that his bank had been run crooked and his clerk jailed for forgery. You bought a convicted forger's loan book cheap, knowing exactly where it came from, and now you'd like this court to believe you had no notion the figures might be dirty. She tilted her head. Sir, either you knew the paper was tainted and bought it anyway, meaning to squeeze folks too poor to check your arithmetic, in which case you're no innocent buyer. You're a man who bought a stolen herd knowing it was stolen. Or you didn't check the loan book of a convicted forger before you spent a fortune on it, in which case you're the most careless banker in the territory, and I'd surely hate to be one of your investors. She spread her hands. I'll let you pick which, sir, but there's no third door, not in this courtroom. A sound went through the gallery. Not a cheer, a courtroom won't allow it, but a low, satisfied exhale, 30 families breathing out at once. The lawyer's mouth opened and shut. Your Honor. Sit down, counselor, the judge said, and there was iron in it. The ladies asked you a fair question, and I find I'd like to hear the answer myself. There was no answer. There was never going to be an answer. Charlotte had learned long ago how to build a room a man couldn't walk out of, and she had built one plank by plank over 2 days, and now the smooth young lawyer stood in the middle of it with nowhere left to stand. And when it was done, the court ruled that the tainted notes, every one that came out of Dunn's bank, were unenforceable as filed, and would have to be reissued honest at the rates the ranchers had actually agreed to if the trust wanted to collect at all. Which it turned out gutted the whole scheme. There was no cheap valley to swallow anymore. There were only honest debts at honest rates, which honest ranchers could carry through a hard winter, the way they always had. The gallery did not cheer because it was a courtroom, but 30 families walked out into the spring sunshine with their land still under their feet, and they gathered in the street, and they looked at the woman who had done it 6 months, along gray with exhaustion, leaning on her husband's arm. And something happened then that no one in Silver Creek ever quite forgot. The oldest rancher among them, a hard old man named Petey Voss, who had never in his life had a kind word for anybody, took off his hat and got down off the boardwalk into the mud of the street, and he knelt. An old man in the mud in front of the whole town. And one by one the others followed him down, hats off heads, bowed 30 families on their knees in the street to the fat woman they'd once laughed at, because she had walked into the lion's den for them and walked out with all their homes in her hands. Charlotte stood there, and she could not speak. "Get up," she finally managed. "All of you get up out of that mud, you'll catch your death. I didn't do it to be knelt to." "We know why you did it, ma'am," old Petey said, still on his knees, looking up at her with wet old eyes. "You did it 'cause it was right and 'cause somebody had to, and 'cause you're the only one in this whole valley who never once got to count on anybody doing the same for you." He got to his feet slow. "And I reckon that's the answer, ain't it? To the thing this whole town spent 2 years whisperin'. Why William Carter walked past 9 pretty girls and chose the one at the end of the line." He turned, and he said it to the whole street loud, so every soul could hear. He chose her because he could see what the rest of us were too damn foolish to. That there was more woman standing at the end of that line, more heart, more spine, more mind, than in the whole rest of us put together. He put his hat back on. William Carter didn't settle, folks. He was the only man in Silver Creek smart enough not to. The rest of us were the ones settlin' every day we looked at that woman and saw nothing but her size. And that was the day the town of Silver Creek finally understood. The child came in high summer, a girl strong-lunged and dark-haired, and William Carter, who had not wept at his own wedding, nor at Dunn's downfall, nor at any hard thing in 5 long years of grief, stood in the doorway of the room he'd once been afraid to enter, and looked at his wife holding their daughter, and he wept like the drought had finally broken. "What'll we call her?" he asked when he could speak. Charlotte looked down at the small face against her chest, and then up at the mantel where a fair-haired woman still smiled out of a silver frame, honored never hidden. "Sarah," she said, "if you'd allow it, for the woman who told you to live. She kept her promise through you, William. The least we can do is keep her name." And William Carter had to leave the room a moment, because there are some kindnesses a man can't stand up under all at once. They set a 5th chair at the table that autumn, and then in the years that came a 6th for a son, and the Carter Ranch that had sat silent for 5 years grew so loud with children and hands and neighbors and Sunday suppers that Charlotte would sometimes stand in the doorway of her full warm kitchen and press her hand to her mouth, overcome, remembering the girl who had lived out of a carpet bag ready to run, certain to her bones that she was too much for any place to hold her. That carpet bag hung on its nail in the barn all her life, exactly as William had promised, high up in the rafters, empty, gathering dust. Their children grew up asking why their mother kept an old ruined bag they weren't allowed to take down, and Charlotte would only ever smile and say it was to remind her of something. She never told them what. But William knew, and Boone knew, and once a year on the anniversary of the day, a rich cowboy walked past 9 pretty girls to the end of a line. Charlotte would walk out to the barn alone and stand under that nail and look up at the bag she had never once had to pack again, and she would say a quiet word of thanks to her mother, who had told her long ago not to let the world make her small. Widow Hartley lived to hold both children, and when she passed gentle in her sleep, they found she'd left the whole of her small estate to Charlotte with a note in her shaking hand that said only 40 years too late, somebody like me finally got her ending. Thank you for letting an old woman watch. Priscilla Vance's family lost their shirts on the Cattlemen's Trust and never showed their faces in the territory again. Amos Dunn served his 7 years and came out an old broken man and moved away where nobody knew him and Charlotte. When she heard, felt no triumph at all, only a distant tired pity for a soul who had spent 60 years so hungry to be big that he'd starved himself to nothing. And on summer evenings when the work was done and the children were abed, William and Charlotte Carter would sit on the porch of their loud, full-living house, 2 wooden chairs pulled close, and look out at the valley that had learned 1 grain of sand at a time to love the woman it had once mocked. "You ever think," Charlotte asked him once, "what would have happened if I'd got in that wagon and left that first day, before you ever said a word?" "Every day of my life," William said. "And then I look up at that nail in the barn, and I remember you didn't." He took her hand. "The world saw your size, Charlie. Every soul in that line, every whisper in that churchyard, every proud man who ever looked at you and looked away. They all saw your size. I know, Charlotte said softly. I saw your soul. He lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips the way he had 1,000 times over the years and would 1,000 times more. And I want it on my gravestone when they lay me down, not my name, not the ranch, just that. That once in a whole valley of folks